Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me today, as always, is my co-host for the show, Austin Davidson.
Hello.
Today is Season 5, Episode 7. We continue to move forward as we track our prospects getting ready for the NFL Draft, which will now be held in a virtual manner. Day 1 of the draft is 2 weeks from today. We still got our work cut out for us, but obviously there's not a whole lot else going on, so that's good. Keeps us busy. And how are you doing on this fine Thursday morning, Austin?
Doing good. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad at all. The weather was really not too good today, so it's nice to be inside on a day like today.
Me down here, too.
So, as we know, the tight end position is one that we were looking at as probably the most position with the most need going into the draft just a few weeks ago, but the Steelers have made a handful of moves this offseason, including probably their biggest move, and that is signing free agent tight end Eric Ebron to a relatively team-friendly deal, one at $6 million, just slightly more than I believe Jesse James was earning on his contract. And when you consider the types of players, yes, they're very different, but Ebron is just 2 years removed from a 13-touchdown season. So picking him up was quite an intriguing move. I was kind of surprised to see it, but one that definitely helps bolster the room in general.
Yeah, Eric Ebron definitely adds to the room. My concerns lie is that there's not a really good blocking tight end after Vance. It's just Ebron isn't known for his blocking at all, and Gentry I don't have the trust in yet. So I mean, Vance is a pretty good blocker. I mean, I felt like he regressed last year, so that's also a concern there as well. But I feel like that's what the Steelers are missing right now. I feel like the Steelers are missing an inline guy that can just that come in for special downs on running downs and come in and block. I worry about Vance's health. If he's not healthy, is the run game going to suffer even more?
And he actually has been regressing as a blocker since he first got to Pittsburgh. It's gotten slightly worse over the years. As a matter of fact, you might remember 2 years ago, the Steelers would sub out Vance McDonald in 2 tight end sets, and they'd put in one of the extra offensive linemen, and then they'd have Jesse James and Xavier Grimble instead. So for whatever reason, McDonald, whether it's probably something to do with injuries, but besides that, there's no real blocking tight end. So if no one else is added to this room, this could be an opportunity for bottom end of the roster guys like Gentry, Christian Scotland-Williamson, and God forbid even Kevin Rader, who are more the latter two being more blocking type tight ends, to have an opportunity to play. And let's be honest with Scotty, this is going to be his last chance, most likely.
He doesn't get that extra practice squad eligibility anymore for being an international player. So, I mean, it is his last chance to prove that he can be useful to this team. And
that's what he's been touted as being someone that can come on and block. So, the scene is set nicely for him. But beyond the duality of McDonald and Ebron, who kind of act like a whole number one tight end on their own, they're obviously separate, lacking in certain areas. Do you think that we'll see a lot of 2 tight end sets with them, because we know the Steelers like to do that, or do you think it's going to be more of a scenario where it's more of a down-based situation where you see McDonald on early downs and you see someone like Ebron later on, like a third down or more in the red zone?
That's a tough question, because I was about to say 2 tight end sets, but then I feel like Eric Ebron's like a red zone specialist. He has a lot of touchdowns over the past 3 years. If I remember correctly, it's 27 over the past 2. I might be wrong on that, but so I could see Vance McDonald being the early down guy, and then as you get down the field, Ebron comes in. But I feel like they'll both get their fair share of playing time. I mean, I feel like the answer is really both. I feel like there's going to be 2 tight end sets, and then Ebron could be the red zone specialist, but Vance be the first one on the field,
Yeah, absolutely. They are relatively interchangeable, but they're have been issues, certainly first and foremost with Ebron's ability to block, which is practically non-existent. The move for Ebron, does that concern you with where you think the team sees Zach Gentry right now? Because we saw him for, four catches last year, something like 10 plays, something like that. And, not a whole lot going on with him. What are your thoughts on Gentry 1 year removed from him being drafted?
I was okay with Gentry being drafted. I know that you weren't, but it does feel like they really don't trust in him. I don't get the vibe that they think that he's going to be someone that's going to stick around for much longer. So I don't feel good about Gentry personally, but yeah.
I just thought he was kind of rich for a 5th round pick. If they had been able to get someone else like Foster Moreau at that pick, who I would imagine they were gunning for, he was taken like 4 picks before that. That would have been preferable. I thought Gentry was more like a 7th round pick, but the jury's still out on him. He's definitely someone that gets an incomplete grade. And for now, we'll see what kind of growth he has from year 1 to year 2. The only loss at this position was free agent Nick Vannett. Remember, the Steelers picked him up in a trade with the Seahawks earlier this past season, trading a 5th round pick. And Vannett turned in. He had a couple nice plays in his first couple games with the Steelers, but was largely ineffective from that point on. He gets a 2-year deal in Denver, and he didn't have a lot of nice things to say about the Steelers upon his leaving, but after inspecting exactly what was said, not just reading the headline, he kind of understand where he's coming from, where he was coming into a pretty difficult situation dealing with lackluster play from the offense, and it wasn't all his fault, but he also didn't do a whole lot to help the situation either.
He did have like one of those plays where he dropped down to get that pass like on his first game with the Steelers, but other than that, he was widely ineffective. It didn't really contribute. I mean, it was one of Kevin Colbert's like few mistakes. Like trading the 5th round pick for Vannett when Luke Wilson was available was such a terrible idea. But I mean, apparently they really liked Vannett because Vannett said the Steelers have been trying to get him for a long time, and then they finally offered the Seahawks something they couldn't refuse to get him. I mean, it is what it is. It's only a 5th round pick, but it was still a mistake.
Hindsight is 20/20. But that being said, the tight end room is one that seems stable for now, but a position where the Steelers are going to have to invest some sort of long-term plan in at some point, because the future for this position beyond the next couple of years does not appear to be on the roster. That being said, I think with only 6 picks in this draft, the likelihood of the Steelers drafting one was significantly reduced the day they signed Eric Ebron. I'm not convinced the Steelers are going to end up signing one or drafting one at all at this point. They might add one in, as an undrafted free agent, but as things are shaping up right now, I kind of look at tight end the way I look at running back, is if they don't take one at 49, they're probably not going to take one at all.
The draft need just isn't really there anymore. I mean, now you have 2 serviceable tight ends. It's just now you need a blocking tight end. Typically that's like an end of the draft tight end or undrafted free agent. If there's a guy that they believe is only good at blocking, those guys usually fall. So I mean, the draft need isn't really high anymore.
Except for Baltimore, because they'll draft those guys.
Baltimore and the Colts, they really love their tight ends.
All right. So that being said, we have what do we have? We have 9 today, because I have a profile coming on Thaddeus Moss before the draft here. So I believe it's 9 in total, right?
If you have 4, I have 5, yeah.
Okay. So I'll, I guess, do you want to go first then? And, well, I guess we should probably introduce our guys. There's not a ton of tight ends. Obviously, that's a position where there's not going to be nearly as much as, say, like wide receiver. But my 4 guys, I looked at 2 of the top guys in the draft for tight end, and Adam Troutman from Dayton, a smaller school guy, but put up big numbers. Bryson Hopkins, who was a pretty good athlete at Purdue. Charlie Warner, who is a tight end from Georgia. And if you don't know any tight ends from Georgia, don't worry, no one else does either, because they don't throw the ball to their tight ends at all. And Oregon tight end Jacob Breland, who was having his best season until his season was ended by a knee injury at Oregon this past season. Those are the 4 guys I'll be taking a look at. Austin, who are the 5 guys you took a look at this time.
So I looked at Cole Kmet from Notre Dame, one of the top tight end prospects. Then I looked at Albert Okwuegbunam. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but I tried. I'm probably going to call him Albert O from here on out. He's from Missouri. He flashed at the combine with the fastest 40 time with 4.49. Then I looked at Dalton Keene from Virginia Tech. After Dalton Keene, I looked at Colby Parkinson from Stanford. And then I finished it off with Mitchell Wilcox from USF.
Alrighty, so why don't we... Do you want to start from the top and work our way down, or you want to start with the lower end guys and work our way to the top?
I'll start with the top. So I'll start with Cole Kmet, again from Notre Dame. 6'6", 262 pounds. And coming out of high school in Lake Barrington, Illinois, Kmet was considered a top 5 tight end prospect and a top 100 overall recruit in the country before deciding to stay in Illinois and go to Notre Dame. As a freshman, Kmet actually played 2 sports, having played baseball and leading Notre Dame with 8 saves, and also playing as a reserve in all 13 games of football, catching 2 passes for 14 yards. He became more involved in the football side of things, playing 11 games, having 15 receptions for 162 yards. In 2019, he got the starting tight end role with Alize Mack declaring for the NFL draft, and he became Ian Book's primary target, catching 43 passes for 515 yards and 6 touchdowns in only 11 games. That's because he missed the first 2 games of the season with a broken collarbone. Kmet decided to forego his senior season and declare for the draft after his first year as a starter. So what's good about him is that he's got some good size that he plans to add more mass to. It also has long arms to go with it. Then he can really high point the ball, and he has an advantage with that, as he has the highest vertical of any tight end at the combine, so he could really get up there and bring it in. Really no matter where it is thrown. He also does a good job of getting defenders off him to create some catch space. Then once he gets the ball, he's a menace. There were quite a few times on tape that a gang of tacklers couldn't even get him down, just had to slow him down enough for the refs to blow the whistle. He plays very heavy inside his pads and has such great ability to absorb contact and run over defenders. It's very hard to get him down. As for his run blocking, as for his blocking in total, he had decent hand placement, does a good job of using his feet to stay connected on base blocks, and has shown to be willing and able to come across the play and land a heavy-hitting block. Going to the negatives, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but he's going to have to add mass to deal with the NFL strength. He avoided the bench press because it wouldn't have done him any good. As you could see you can see on tape the strength isn't there as both a blocker and as a receiver, as he gets jammed within the first 5 yards a lot and often really messes him up. Not only that, but there are some hand strength concerns when it comes down to coming down with contested catches. He seemed to struggle a bit there. Now, getting back to his blocking, not only does his strength work, but so does his body control, as he's inefficient and slow when getting into block fits, and he also needs to play with earlier inside hands and rolled hips at the point of attack to become better. Hard to fix or learn, and that's the instincts. He just doesn't have the instincts to be able to be an effective move blocker. Now to his route running, he can play too tall coming off the ball and into his routes, and also plays upright into breaks, which allows defenders to see what he's doing and jump the route. So overall, I think Kmet could have benefited from another year, but then again, I don't think highly enough of Ian Book, so maybe it is the right choice to declare early. I mean, he is by some considered the best tight end in this draft class, but unfortunately this is a relatively weak class. Lance Zierlein has compared him to Tyler Higbee, and I personally don't have a comparison for him. But for the arguably best tight end in the draft, I don't see him as a first-rounder. Oftentimes, rookie tight ends do need to sit and develop, but I think Kmet needs a lot of time to develop, which pushes him out of the first-round conversation for me. I think he will somewhere in the second round, but I would be shocked if he fell any further than that. He's still one of the best tight ends in this class, so I don't see him falling out of the second round. I think that's where he goes. So that was... I was about to call him Adam Trautman. I was about to call him your prospect. That was Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. And I watched his games versus Georgia in 2019, versus Virginia in 2019, and versus Virginia Tech in 2019. What prospect would you like to talk about first?
I am going to start with Adam Trautman, the senior from Dayton. That's the guy who I feel like has been gaining a lot of steam as we've gotten towards the draft. He didn't exactly blow things away at the combine, but he was pretty solid, of course, and he has a lot to fall back on as a successful player at Dayton. He actually was a quarterback at Michigan, and the Dayton Flyers used him in a lot of different ways at Dayton. I'll get to that in a little bit. As far as his bio goes, his brother plays there at Dayton. He's a linebacker too, so some football runs in the family. Didn't play as a redshirt player in 2015. He was the scout team's offensive player of the year. And then the Flyers started using him as kind of a Swiss Army knife on offense. They had him line up in tight end, in the slot as a receiver, as a wildcat quarterback, and he'd run the option sometimes. He played in 11 games and caught 24 passes and 3 touchdowns. Then he really blew up his second season as a major player on the team. In 2017, he started by becoming an all-conference selection with 43 catches for 500-plus yards and 5 touchdowns, had 41 more catches for 600 yards and 9 touchdowns the following year. And then last year, he was a first-team All-American, the Pioneer League Offensive Player of the Year by catching 70 passes for 916 yards and 14 touchdowns, which was 5th best at the FCS level in 11 starts. So Troutman was a guy that really improved each of his 4 years as a player, and overall just 5 years, starting when he was just a scout team player. He stands at 6'5" and 255 pounds, so he's got the good size that you like to see from a tight end, but he still has potential to add bulk, which is pretty impressive to say the least, because that's a pretty big man already. He was used pretty often at Dayton. He was the school's leading receiver by the time he finished up there. And he was a guy that isn't really bothered by in-your-face coverage. He can make contested catches with little separation. And he's got relatively good acceleration out of his breaks with those powerful legs. And he's experienced, I saw a lot on tape of, mesh concepts, rub routes. He was able to get himself and his other receivers open several times with that kind of play. And he's good at positioning himself when the ball's in the air. He high points the ball effectively. He had a pretty impressive touchdown against... which team was it? I think it was Jacksonville. It was Jacksonville. He was a former basketball player, so he knows how to box out defenders like he's trying to get a rebound. As I mentioned before, he was kind of used as a Swiss Army knife. He's run option quarterback sometimes too. And in case you can't really tell, he did dominate his competition. He had probably one of the best individual performances I've seen from a prospect in any game that I've looked at over the years, where he had 4 touchdowns against Jacksonville, and he scored all 4 in different ways. The first was a leaping touchdown in the back corner of the end zone from 18 yards out. Then he had Rob Gronkowski-esque play, where he caught the ball between 2 defenders about 30 yards out and then dragged them the final 5 yards into the end zone. Caught a 2-yard pass, caught a ball 2 yards from the goal line and ran it in, and then received a dump off from the 31-yard line and ran it in from there. So 4 different touchdowns showing off his different skill set. So all those good things, there are still some negative things. And as was the case with edge rusher Derek Tuska, who I talked about on our last podcast, he did play at a lower level of college football. And while he did dominate, there are obvious questions about how he's going to translate to the NFL. He just dominated his competition physically, and that's not going to be possible at the NFL level. Another thing is that FCS teams rarely jammed tight ends when they were coming off the line of scrimmage, so he rarely saw that. That will happen in the NFL, so we don't know how he's going to handle it. Dayton ran a pretty simplistic offense. It worked, but the fact of the matter is Mr. Troutman here had a pretty limited route tree, and he doesn't adjust to backyard football after the play is broken down, which for the next couple of years, Ben Roethlisberger, he's not the backyard Ben we used to know, but that's something that he still does, and that's becoming a way of the life in the NFL. You see a lot of plays breaking down, and he really doesn't know how to handle that. He's also not a good yard after catch guy. That long touchdown against Jacksonville I was talking about had more to do with the busted coverage where he was left running on his own than it had to do with him just dragging guys or running around guys. Also, his blocking technique is really not that good. He shoots out of his stance too tall. He doesn't place his hands well, and his technique is more frantic than it is fluid. Also, I saw what was probably his worst tape as well. against San Diego this past season. He dropped 2 touchdowns in that game, 2 touchdown passes in that game. And also, I gotta say, it was really hard seeing exactly what was going on sometimes because Dayton uses this horrible uniform scheme where they have like navy blue numbers with no outline on like a dark red jersey, and it was hard to see sometimes because oftentimes the videos we look at, Austin, I'm sure that you've seen this, they highlight where the player is, and they didn't always do that with Mr. Troutman, so it was pretty hard finding out who he was sometimes. So, but anyways.
That 100% sucks. I hate when they don't highlight the player. Sometimes it comes down to it, though. Sometimes, like, there's not a lot of video on players and stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm. So Adam Troutman, despite the concerns of playing just a level below the top level of college football, he appears to have all the physical tools and experience to prove that he can be a good tight end in the NFL. He has good enough athleticism, he's powerful, and he has a ton of production in college. And even though he's not a great blocker right now, the right coaching should make him a better player in that area. The big question is going to be how long it takes for him to translate and just how high his ceiling can be. Lance Zierlein from NFL.com believes he's a day 3 prospect, meaning to me that his last evaluation of Troutman was either months ago or he was simply looking at a different player when he wrote that draft profile. That's quite simply not true. Troutman might actually be the best tight end in this class, which again is a weaker class, but he still might be the best. Frankly, I'd be surprised if he was available at pick number 49 for the Steelers, and even though he is one of the best tight ends, he probably would not contribute much in year 1, or maybe not even year 2. It would be an attractive offer or an attractive pick at 49, but I don't think he'll be available at that point. And again, even if you do pick him, how much is he going to help in year 1? That I am not too sure about right now. So that being said, Adam Troutman, impressive, but again, I'm not sure that he's going to satisfy much of a need at this point. So, with that being the case, who is your second prospect? Do you want to talk about Albert O?
Yeah, so Albert Okwuegbunam from Missouri, he's 6'5" and 258 pounds. He's sometimes referred to as Chucks because his middle name is Chuck. Oh, I wasn't prepared for that name. I forgot to look at that. His middle name is Chukwumeka. Chukwumeka. That sounds good. He grew up in Springfield, Illinois, and decided to go to Missouri. In 2016, he redshirted to add weight to his growing fame. And then as a redshirt freshman back in 2017, he received second-team All-SEC and SEC All-Freshman honors for a whopping 11 touchdowns on only 29 catches for 415 yards. May I remind you, he played with Drew Lock in that season. His sophomore season was cut short due to a shoulder injury, but he still had started the first 9 games, catching 43 passes for 466 yards and also 6 touchdowns. Unfortunately, he suffered another shoulder injury in his junior season, but this time it only caused him to miss 2 games, starting 9 of the 11 games, but was still able to get second-team All-SEC accolades for a team-leading 6 touchdowns on 26 catches for 306 yards, and perhaps more impressive, doing it without Drew Lock, instead doing it with, I forget his first name, but Bryant now, for the first time. Following his junior season, he declared for the draft. So, what's good about him is the combination of size and speed he possesses is rare. In fact, since 2007, only 2 other tight ends ran a faster 40 time than he did, and that's pretty impressive. I don't remember the second one, but one's Evan Ingram. Then the wide frame he has really makes him really good on contested catches and only gets multiplied when he's in the end zone. He's a true game changer there, averaging a touchdown once every 4.2 catches. It's not just his contested catch ability, though. He has solid hands, his ball skills are impressive, and in some games he is too much for teams running down the seam, like the game against Memphis where he got 2 touchdowns of over 40-plus yards because he has surprising breakaway speed after the catch. Albert O has something similar to Wilcox, playing with 2 not very accurate quarterbacks over the years. He's become really good at leaping, twisting, and laying out to make tough grabs. Then finally, as a blocker, I felt like as a blocker, I felt like he was already adequate, but he has the size and strength to be able to improve and he keeps his hands inside and hips rolled on kick-out block. I want to start with something really odd that I'd never really seen written or said about a prospect. Lance Zerloin says scouts question toughness and willingness to play with pain. I have no idea what that's alluding to, and I know I gave props to through a stress fracture in his foot, but like, no one should have to play through real pain or anything. So I'm not sure what the injury was that caused this narrative. If he just like he got hurt and it turned out to just be a bruise and he never came back in or something like that. But I don't know. It was odd. I couldn't find what caused that narrative. But anyway, back to the rest. While he has the speed, it isn't always consistent, and his play speed doesn't always scream that he was the fastest tight end in the draft class. He just doesn't play consistently with the speed. Then his route running is just really bad. It's completely mechanical. Like, he's counting his steps and thinking about it. And this plays into his play speed because acceleration out of turn isn't great at all. He has also run right into off coverage and is shown to be coverable underneath because he's slow off the line and doesn't really elude guys trying to redirect him. Then while he's adequate as a blocker, he doesn't really show the nastiness often enough when he is blocking. So overall, Alberto is a boomer bust kind of guy. His positives are really good, but his route running is extremely bad. Lance Zerloin compared him to Mark Andrews, but other than height and weight, they're absolutely nothing alike, as Andrews was a wide receiver turned tight end that had solid route running coming out because of it, and Alberto has way bigger hands and arms. I think what Zerloin thought of was the catches per touchdown stat, where Alberto averaged a touchdown every 4.2 catches, and Andrews had a touchdown every 5 catches coming out of Oklahoma. Regardless, back to Okwuegbunam, I don't have a comparison for him, but I do have a draft projection. To me, he screams third round or maybe even early fourth, but his 40 time may have turned some heads and moved him up to the late second round in a pretty bad tight end class. Still, I think he's going to go in the third round. So that was Albert Okwuegbunam from Missouri. I watched his highlights, his game versus Ole Miss in 2019, versus South Carolina in 2019, and versus Memphis in 2018. Who's your next prospect?
All right, I'm going to be talking about now Brycen Hopkins, another one of the top-level tight ends in this draft class, a 6'4", 245-pound redshirt senior for the Boilermakers. Had the second-best 40-yard dash time of any tight end in this class and the third-best 20-yard shuttle time. So he is a pretty fast dude. A little bit about Brycen Hopkins. His father, Brad, was a former Pro Bowl offensive lineman for the Titans back in the day. And as far as his career goes, he started playing in high school, so he was a late bloomer, if you will. Still dominated when he started playing and became an all-state player as a senior. Got to the Boilermakers team and redshirted right away. Then he played in 11 games and started 1, caught 10 passes and 4 touchdowns, so that's pretty impressive. His redshirt freshman season of 2016. Caught 25 passes the following season for 3 touchdowns and no starts. And then started 4 games his redshirt junior season of 2018, catching 25 passes for 349 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then last season, he had a typo there. I want to say that's 34 receptions or 44 receptions for 583 yards. Must have been 34. For 17.1 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns. This is back in 2018. And started 4 games. And then last season, he was the Big Ten tight end of the year and a first-team all-conference member with 61 catches for 830 yards and 7 touchdowns, starting in 11 of 12 games. So as you might have picked up from the first things I was saying about Brycen Hopkins, he's a very good athlete at the tight end position, and he's got pretty good short area quickness. He breaks out of his routes quickly and efficiently. He wastes very little motion at the top of his route and does a good job getting open in a jiffy. He looks for and finds the soft spot in zone coverage when he's open, or when he has the chance to. And that athleticism helps him to open up small windows with his size. He's willing to take hits and plays over the middle. He was used as a move blocker in the run game, so they pulled him at times. And he is willing to take on bigger defensive players. That's about the only truly great things I saw with him, though. A few of his bigger plays that I saw resulted from scheme-based plays rather than actual wins with talent, which was kind of disappointing. He's just not that good of a run blocker right now. He's not strong enough, and bump and run coverage, especially linebackers jamming him at the line of scrimmage when he's on the end. That's given him a lot of trouble. He doesn't have naturally soft hands. This was the big red flag for me, is that he doesn't catch the ball away from his body often. He's a body catcher, and he had a huge issue with drops. He dropped 3 passes in the games that I watched. He doesn't high point the ball well, and again, just not a very consistent blocker. So at the end of the day, Brycen Hopkins, he's a good enough athlete to warrant legitimate day 2 interest, I believe. But his drop problems and issues with strong man-to-man coverage are something that's probably not going to improve even as he does develop. I thought a lot about Noah Fant from last year when I was looking at Brycen Hopkins. I didn't love Noah Fant, but his athleticism made it easier to forgive some of his shortcomings. Hopkins is similar in that regard, but he's definitely not the same caliber player that Noah Fant is. He could become a better blocker, and even could see some time as an H-back, since his best asset as a blocker seems to be that he moves well in short spaces and is willing to take on defenders in impact blocking situations. But overall, I don't see anything that Hopkins does overly well, and even his ability as a receiver is greatly diminished when you drop the ball that much. I think he has the potential to be a solid number 2 tight end in this league, but is going to be limited in some areas. Best case scenario, I should say, is that he's a lower end 1B guy, kind of like Jesse James when he was leaving. I think he's a late day 2 guy, probably a mid round 3, but his drop issues could push him to the early 4th round, or teams that want a good athlete could take him sometime in the late 2nd round. So I could see either or happening. I forgot to mention with Adam Troutman, I watched my sources for him. I watched his games against San Diego, Jacksonville, and Drake University. And for Hopkins, I watched his games against, watched his games against Nebraska from 2018, TCU this past season, and Maryland this year as well. So that was Brycen Hopkins. He was the last of my top-end guys. The guy you were wanting to talk about next, was that Dalton Keene?
Yeah, Dalton Keene from Virginia Tech. He's 6'4" and 253 pounds. Keene's father played at Murray State when Bud Foster, the recently retired defensive coordinator at Virginia Tech, was the head coach over there. From then on, the families became pretty close, so it made sense for Keene to go all the way from Colorado to Virginia Tech to play for Foster's team. He even got to start right away, starting 12 of 13 games as a true freshman, getting 10 catches for 167 yards. As a sophomore, he was an honorable mention All-ACC pick after starting 12 of 13 games, catching 28 passes for 341 yards, and having 3 touchdowns. As a junior, he started 13 games and caught 21 balls for 240 yards and 5 touchdowns, as well as adding 11 carries for 33 yards. Keene decided to forego his senior season and declare for the draft early. And what I like about Keene is his versatility. I saw him line up essentially everywhere, on the line, at the halfback spot, at the fullback spot, split out wide, everything. That's it. And to me, that means he can handle some pretty complex offenses with a lot of directions for him, so I like that. Then I felt like his blocking was excellent. He's the only tight end that I looked at that had a block put into their highlights, and man, does he really hold his own play to play. It wasn't just one highlight. He plays with that ferocity and nastiness that you love to see, and it's just and it's not just in his blocking. Everything he does looks super aggressive. Like after a catch, he's shoulder and try to blow through defenders to get those extra yards, and it works. He plays really strong despite not being a top 5 performer in the bench press. And I know what I'm saying. I know that your strength in your legs has nothing to do with the bench press, like when you're pushing through people, but still. The play strength is there, and again, this man has pancake blocks on tape. All that matters is he plays strong. Last couple things are that he's highly athletic, and this allows him to reach best beyond his frame, and he's also a good blocker in space, adjusting to be a lead blocker when needed. Wow, can't speak today. But that's pretty typical. Anyway, negatives. Now his build isn't very good to be a blocker at the NFL level, and this could be a problem because it's going to be hard to get more mass on his frame. And it is possible, just not a lot of mass can be added easily. Then while I applauded his versatility position-wise, his route tree was very limited. He has shown to be slow to sink and open up against zone. And the tape I watched against Cincinnati, I saw he needed extra steps to be able to gather his breaks. Then as a blocker, he gets stacked and discarded against power. He can come into blocks at inconsistent angles, and he lets his body control where his feet go, which can lead him to being off balance. Last couple things here are that he ducks his helmet into contact sometimes while trying to lower his shoulder, and also tries to use his shoulder or flipper into the hands at times. So this is going to be weird, possibly my weirdest comparison ever, but Dalton Keene reminded me a lot of Le'Veon Bell. Yes, I am comparing a tight end to a running back, but here was the thought process. First of all, outside of football things, like outside of playing, he was lined up in the backfield pretty much just as much as Lev was. He also wore number 29, which to me is a running back number, which immediately put it in my head that he was a running back, even though it was ridiculous. Like, I obviously didn't know that. It was just like one of my stupid thoughts going through my head. And then his blocking while lining up for both the fullback and H-back positions were great, and it would be split out wide occasionally and moved around like Lev Bell was. Then Keene showed the patient running style with the ball in his hands, and the announcer even described it as like a running back on one of his plays, while also displaying Bell's ability to absorb contact. So, possibly my weirdest comparison ever. I couldn't shake the thought of, first of all, him being a running back, and then, wow, he kind of plays like Le'Veon Bell. But anyhow, he was a very interesting tight end. He was probably the best blocker I looked at, but there are questions to whether that will transition to the NFL level. Regardless, though, even with his negatives, after a solid combine, I think he'll be drafted in round 4. But I give him a 3rd-round grade for his versatility and willingness to bet on his and my willingness to bet on his blocking transfer. He has that nastiness. As long as you have that nastiness, I think that blocking can transfer over. And just to go back to his combine stats, I just wanted to point out, he had the 5th best 40-yard dash, the 1st broad jump, the 3rd best 3 cone drill, and the 1st 20-yard shuttle. So he was the best in 2 different categories. And he was top 5 in almost all of them. The only thing he didn't place top 5 was bench press, and he wasn't bottom 5, so, So, again, that was Dalton Keene out of Virginia Tech. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of tape on him, so I kind of going off on a whim. I watched 2 of his highlights, and then I watched versus Cincinnati back in 2018, so I didn't even get to see any recent tape, which I found odd. It was like the first guy that I didn't find a game from 2019. But, I feel like I still got a good read on him regardless. But, yeah, who's your next prospect?
Let me ask you, Austin, speaking of good blockers, you remember Trayvon Wesco, the guy from West Virginia last year that I equated to being an extra lineman, right?
And the Jets guy.
Yes, the guy who caught one of his 2 passes that year for like 30 yards. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so what I was thinking about was, you think about how little he caught the ball, and there was actually a decent amount of tape on him last year, but he was kind of a higher projected guy than my next prospect, Charlie Warner, and you're talking about finding it difficult to find tape. I already knew that finding tape on Charlie Warner was going to be pretty difficult. So there was only one game, as I suspected, and that was the Notre Dame game this year when Georgia played Notre Dame. So my solution to that, Austin, you ready for this? Because I was thinking about blocking. I decided to search Georgia's offensive line versus, and I came up with the Sugar Bowl against Texas from 2019, and I also watched the NFL PA Bowl, in which Charlie Warner was the leading receiver for his team. So I'm just going to start off with Charlie Warner, the Georgia Bulldogs tight end, a senior at 6'5" and 244 pounds. And I need to just get this out there. I don't know who Georgia's offensive coordinator is. I should look it up. But someone, a former tight end or a current tight end, must have taken a dump in his cereal or something, because this guy will do anything and everything to not involve his tight ends in his offense. And a co-conspirator is, of course, quarterback Jake Fromm that I looked at earlier this year. I have to say that I'm just shocked at the way Georgia deploys their offense, and I guess I can't complain too much because they've been a successful team for the better part of, a decade plus. But I really am confused at the way that Georgia uses their tight ends. I really do think that what I saw from Charlie Warner, and I'll get to that, was a pretty good football player, but for whatever reason, Georgia just does not utilize their tight ends. So, for instance, Charlie Warner, the nephew of former College Football Hall of Fame DB Scott Warner, who won a championship for the Bulldogs in 1980, he played in all 4 years at Georgia. And are you ready for these wild stat lines? Starting with his first 3 seasons, in which he caught no touchdown passes, he was the number 2 tight end. He caught 5 passes for 50 yards, 9 passes for 100 yards and then 11 passes for 148 yards in his first 3 seasons at Georgia. And then last year, as the primary tight end, he caught 9 passes for 78 yards and 1 touchdown in 14 starts. This guy was the number 1 tight end for the Bulldogs last year.
Oh, Lord. They really hate their tight end, man. Less than 10 catches?
Yeah. So let me explain why there are reasons that this guy is being up for consideration as an NFL draft prospect. And I kind of alluded to it by mentioning Trayvon Wesco, but this guy is basically a really good blocking specialist. He's got a high motor type of guy, and he was probably the most active blocker I looked at for any tight end in this draft class. He was diverse. They used him as a fullback, an H-back, split out wide. They had him lined up. Even like his outside receivers, which kind of blew my mind. As far as I'm concerned, when they don't throw to the tight end, having him lined up out there is the same as not having anyone out there at all. Using 10 players would have been the same difference, in my opinion. But in any case, he lined up everywhere. And he takes on blocks in the hole like a true fullback when he's pulling like an offensive lineman. And that was really cool to see. He's a really good backside blocker. Even the best edge rushers of the SEC, he was giving them problems with. And he's got veracity and has little issues dealing with bigger players than him. And he has fantastic blocking technique. So just overall, you're getting a really good blocker, probably the best blocking tight end in the SEC this past season. And as far as his receiving goes, there's not a whole lot to go off of, but he does accelerate quickly out of his breaks, which is nice to see. And he's got adequate speed and athletic ability, good enough, in my opinion, to be on an NFL roster. And this was evidenced by his performance in the NFLPA Bowl, where I did mention he was the leading receiver for his team. He caught 3 passes for 65 yards. And mind you, that was just 13 yards away from his season total. So maybe there's the potential that he could do even more when given the opportunity in an NFL offense. Imagine if someone threw him the ball. In any case, though, those were all the good things about Charlie Woerner. The negatives: he's slightly underweight at just 244 pounds for being a blocking tight end. You don't want a blocking tight end to be that slim. And also, this is probably the big issue with him if he's going to be a blocking specialist, is he's got very short arms at 31 1/8 inches. It's something that he's probably going to struggle with as a blocker for his entire career. And most of the remaining negatives I'm going to talk about here are the fact that Georgia refuses to use their tight ends in the passing game. So for his career, Woerner had just 34 catches and 376 yards with 1 touchdown. And even though it's not really his fault, teams are going to be rightfully wary just because they don't know if he can handle being a regular pass catcher at the NFL level. His sample size is so small, it's hard to judge just how good or bad he is in this area. Obviously, when you don't catch many passes, it's likely to assume he didn't have a big route tree, and that's because he didn't. He doesn't seem to have a good feel for the soft spot and zone coverage, and he struggles to come down with balls in tight windows, and also he's not really a yards after catch kind of guy. So I watched the 2-3 games I was talking about, not including the PA Bowl. He was targeted 4 times in 2 games over 2 different seasons, and from what I watched, 3 of those targets were either off target because they were poorly thrown passes, which he did catch, one way behind him and another at his feet, or he had no chance because as he caught it, he was being tackled. So I could talk about Georgia's lack of use of guys like Woerner for a long time, and I already have, but that's not the point. The point is that I think he could be a very sneaky good find for a team late in this draft. It might actually be doing him a favor that he could catch on as a number 2 guy. And he's got not great upside, but like a guy like Troutman or Bryson Hopkins. But I think that he's got sneaky good potential. And as a matter of fact, I think there's a strong argument to be made that he's one of the best blocking tight ends we've seen in the draft the last few years. And I equated him to kind of similar to Trayvon Wesco. They are similar in that they're blocking specialists, but they are different in the fact that Wesco was shorter and heavier like a lineman, and Woerner is a little taller and slimmer, so he might actually have some more upside as a receiver, which is kind of interesting. But I think that he's good enough to be drafted, probably a later day 3 guy. And if the Steelers hadn't picked up Eric Ebron, Woerner would be the guy I'd be banging the table for. but I just think it's unlikely right now. But if somehow he goes undrafted, I'd be doing everything I could to get him in Pittsburgh because I think he'd be a very interesting player with perhaps some limited upside, but someone that I think could be a solid number 2 tight end in this league for a relatively cheap price. So that was Charlie Warner from Georgia, one of the guys I truly enjoyed looking at in this pre-draft process. You have 2 guys left, Austin. Who do you want to look at first?
I'm going to talk about Colby Parkinson from Stanford. He is 6'7" and 252 pounds. Parkinson came out of high school as not only a 5-star recruit, but a top 30 overall prospect, and he decided to go to Stanford, probably after seeing how they developed and used tight ends well enough to have 5 underclassmen drafted from Stanford between 2013 and 2019. And just to say it on the side, Stanford probably uses tight ends way more than a lot of other schools. So we're going from the polar opposite. We're going from Georgia that doesn't use their tight ends to Stanford that likes to put 3 tight ends on the field like all the time. So where was I? He played as a reserve, but still made a solid impact with 4 touchdowns and only 10 catches for 97 yards. In 2018, he was able to see more action as Dalton Schultz was drafted by the Cowboys in the 2018 draft. So he got chance to be in 2 tight end sets with Caden Smith. Was able to earn honorable mention all-conference honors for his 29 catches for 485 yards and 7 touchdowns. Caden Smith was then drafted by the Giants and left Parkinson with a starting role and was able to amass 48 receptions for 589 yards and a touchdown through his 12 starts. Parkinson is another tight end that decided to declare early, declaring following his junior season for the draft. So the positive, standing at 6'7", he definitely has the height and length to be an NFL player and definitely use it to his advantage, especially in the red zone, as he could extend in high point to play over safeties. Also grabs the ball away from his body, so it makes it hard for opponents to rake it at the ball. Then his route running was really good for a big guy, and he can be useful on all 3 levels of the field while being used in a variety of alignments, showing he can stride into routes like a big receiver, make the crisp breaks needed to play underneath, and create route leverage to defeat the coverage leverage. Then he has the body control and focus to make necessary adjustments when striding downfield and to make challenging catches. So going to the negatives, my biggest problem with Parkinson is he wasn't asked to block much, and when he did, it wasn't great. Like, he waited for defenders to engage with him rather than showing the ferocity to be the first one to land the punch. And this is both as a run blocker and when he's on the second level. He also didn't do a good job of securing leverage at the point of attack, and overall, Parkinson was probably the worst blocker I looked at. Stanford tended to have him block a lot for a good reason. Then his physique isn't all filled out. He has thin limbs and a lean frame, so he could really deal with some bulking up. 252 for a 6 and 7 pound guy is a little small, so he probably should add a little bit more weight. Then there are concerns he will be limited just to a big slot role once he gets to the NFL. Last 2 things are that he's allowed safeties to pester him, and his red zone release was too predictable in his final season. So overall, Lance Sterling compared him to the Dolphins tight end Mike Gesicki, and I don't really see that as Gesicki was an athletic freak coming out, and Parkinson overall isn't. I have big concerns with Parkinson. He just isn't a very good blocker, and that takes away a lot from me. To me, he projects as a 5th rounder because of it. His game is just incomplete, and I get that he's tall, but he needs to add mass and won't be able to contribute right away because of it. I'm thinking because he's 6'7", he's going to be overvalued and taken in the 4th, but personally, I think he's a 5th round pick. And so I looked at his highlights. I watched versus Northwestern in 2019, versus Central Florida in 2019, and then versus Washington in 2018. So do you have one more prospect?
Yes, sir. It's Jacob Breeland from Oregon, a redshirt senior at 6'5" and 252 pounds. Breeland's father was a former linebacker at USC and also had a brief pro career. Jacob is trying to follow in his footsteps. He had a 5-year career as an Oregon Duck. He was a redshirted player in 2015, then played sparingly in 11 games as a redshirt freshman. And then exploded onto the scene for the Ducks in his 2nd season, becoming an honorable mention All Pac-12 member, catching 18 passes for 320 yards and 5 touchdowns in 12 games, 11 starts. Then caught 24 passes for 377 yards and 2 touchdowns in 10 starts the following year. And then last year, he put up similar numbers, but did so in just 6 games as opposed to 12. So he put up 26 receptions for 400 yards and 6 touchdowns in just 6 games. Unfortunately, his career year was over before it really got going. He suffered a season-ending non-contact knee injury against who did he suffer it against? I watched it against Colorado, so that was unfortunate to see. But Breeland is another guy that could be a well-kept secret coming out. He has relatively good footwork on his routes. It's easier for him to change speed with ease, from what I saw. He's got a solid short area burst to get some separation, and has deceptive elusiveness for a bigger guy. He goes all out for contested balls and does a good job of finding the soft spot in zone coverage, and he has decent position flexibility from like I've saw from most of the guys I've looked at. He can align on the end as a prototypical wide tight end. He's been flexed out as a slot receiver and also played some snaps in the backfield as an H-back. He shows good effort as a blocker and moves relatively well in space. Another guy that's willing to take punishment over the middle of the field. And even though he did have a season-ending injury, he was absolutely tearing it up prior to that injury this past season. The negatives, though, obviously that season-ending injury was not something you want to see, and I watched it too, a non-contact injury where he went down and you knew right away it was something serious. Also, he's just not a good blocker in general. I know he moves well in space as a blocker, but he's not very good at it, and this is evidenced by the fact that the team didn't ask him to do a lot either. He also struggles to uncover from man coverage, and coverage linebackers and even run support safeties aren't going to have an issue keeping up with him. He lacks play strength, has average athleticism, and when you consider the fact that he's not a great blocker, there's not really a ton of redeeming factors here. So he has a lower ceiling, and a lot of his touchdown production from his career was scheme-based, based on screens and fakes, as opposed to him winning on individual talent. So overall, Jacob Breeland does have a lot of tools in his toolbox, but the issue is none of the tools are high quality. He's got a decent frame, decent enough athleticism, and decent ball skills, and at best is an okay blocker, but he really doesn't project greatly to the NFL. And with a lot of his success based on scheme and not talent, there are concerns about how much upside he really has. And he lost his best chance to improve his stock when he suffered a season-ending knee injury. So he might be a sneaky good find sometime down the road, later in the draft or as a free agent, but he really didn't pop on tape enough for me to think that he's worth anything more than a mid-day 3 pick at best. So Jacob Breeland, unfortunate finishing his career the way he did. Maybe he'll be a diamond in the rough, but I personally just don't see it. But, time will tell, of course. That being said, you have one more guy, Mitchell Wilcox from USF. What do you think of him?
Overall, he was okay. He is 6'3" and 247 pounds. He joined USF in 2015 and redshirted his first season, but he was able to come out strong in his second season, earning second-team All-Conference after starting 8 of 13 games and making 12 catches for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. In 2017, he had a somewhat forgettable campaign, catching 17 passes for 158 yards and 2 touchdowns, but in 2018 is where he really shined. He earned himself first-team All-Conference after breaking the school's record for receptions by a tight end at 43, and also breaking the record for yards from a tight end with 540. He also was able to tack on 2 touchdowns as well. In 2019, his production dropped off a little as USF's offense was straight poo-poo, but he was able to earn honorable mention All-Conference accolades for 28 receptions, 350 yards, and 5 touchdowns through 12 starts. With no more years of eligibility left, he declared for the draft. Starting with his passes, after watching tons of passes sail over heads and far in front of players with USF, it made Wilcox have the weirdest, most specific thing to excel at ever: diving catches. I obviously didn't watch every other tight end in this draft, but I can almost guarantee you that you're not going to find a tight end better at making diving catches. His highlights are essentially full of them. He could be open. John first pointed this out. John has been watching a lot of USF games lately, or not a lot, just one, but regardless. And he pointed out that there was a diving catch that he made that he was uncovered, and I laughed about it, and then I watched his highlights, and that's all of his highlights. Their offense is so terrible that even when he's open, the quarterback is overthrowing him, and he has to dive to make open catches. So he's very skilled there. But anyway, this is tied in with other positives, such as the effort is 100% there. Every ball is worth an attempt for him, and also he's proven to be great at at keeping track of the ball, and that kind of happens if the ball is never put on the money. Then he plays with a lot of toughness, both in his blocking and catches. He showed a lot of balance and focus to be able to come down with balls and coverage. Then as a blocker, he had been trusted with a lot of inline work in the run game, showing he could work with his tackles on double team blocks. Then last couple things that he works up to his second level blocks with timing and control, and also shown to be an effective move blocker in space. So the bad things, at 9 1/8 inch hands, he has pretty small hands for a guy his size, which is always a concern when it comes to catching and holding onto balls with increased velocity of throws and increased skills of defensive players at the NFL level. Then he is not a good athlete at all. So going through his combine, his 40-yard dash was the third worst. He didn't participate in the bench press. His vertical jump was the second worst. His broad jump was the third worst. His three-cone drill was the fourth worst. And his 20-yard shuttle was the fifth worst of all participating tight ends. So he did not have a good time at the combine. He probably would have been a bottom 5 performer in the bench press as well. He's not that strong, and he didn't participate in that. He probably would have been a bottom 5 performer in every single category, which is not great. I saw him get walked back on film a few times on tape, so I do think that he wouldn't have had the strongest bench press. But again, it could have been in his legs. Regardless, it could just be because of his poor hand placement, though, that makes him seem weaker than he is. Again, who knows? This kind of ties into his athleticism, but he's not going to run the sharpest routes with his slug-footed approach into short area breaks, and he's very uncoordinated looking in space, playing with tight hips. Then to go along with added strength, he will need for inline work at the NFL, he will also need to stop waist spinning at the point of attack and also stop overstepping on wall-up blocks so defenders can't just work around him. So I thought Wilcox had some great hands, but unfortunately he probably will not be able to be used as a blocker as he just isn't strong enough, doesn't have the technique down to be able to handle it. And he can have the greatest hands in the draft, but with the terrible athletic abilities, defenders are going to be able to cover him easily. I actually do have a comparison for him, and that's that he is a short and tagged Gentry. They had shockingly similar combine performances and close hand sizes. The only difference is Gentry is 6'8", and Wilcox is 6'3", which is actually a pretty big difference. Then again, John had described Gentry's route running as smooth. When he looked at him last year, I went back just to look at what John said about Gentry to make sure I wasn't completely off base. But Wilcox's route running is anything but smooth. So without the combine, I think Wilcox should have been a late round 6 to round 7 prospect. But now he projects as a round 7 to priority undrafted free agent, which I'm leaning towards undrafted free agent. Then again, I don't know with these tight ends, man. I think that he's going to be an undrafted free agent. And I watched 2 different highlights. I watched versus SMU in 2019 and versus Illinois in 2018. So that wraps up all the tight ends. Would you like to rank your tight ends?
Yeah, so I have clear-cut top tier guys and bottom tier as far as who I would like to see in Pittsburgh if they were available. First is Adam Troutman. First of all, he needs like a nickname. I guess the Big Trout kind of makes sense. I was thinking Big Tuna would be cool, but when you have Trout in your name, you kind of have to have Trout in a nickname.
Tuna doesn't really work there.
It really doesn't, but the problem is, isn't a trout like a small fish?
Trouts are big.
They are big? Okay, well, I know nothing about fish.
Trouts are big.
Apparently, I know nothing about fish. Anyhow, what I can tell you is that Troutman was a guy that did impress me in a lot of areas, but the only place he really makes sense is at 49, and I have a feeling he's going to be gone when the Steelers pick. And the other thing you need to consider is that the Steelers being in win-now mode, Troutman is going to take at least a year before he can really probably add a lot to the team's offense. So you need to think about that if you're drafting. And even though I'd like to see it happen, I'd like to see him be the future of the position. It's a difficult spot to want to take a guy like that right now, which is why they went out and got a guy like Eric Ebron. I like it, but I don't think it's going to happen. Second, I have Charlie Warner. I probably made it no secret that I really like Warner, but again, adding guys like Zach Gentry and Eric Ebron over the past 2 years, I really just don't see a spot for Warner adding any playing time. The one reason I do like him, though, is that you could probably find a pretty good steal for a late round pick. I think he's going to be gone sometime in the 6th round, but even if he's undrafted, that's a huge plus where you could be getting a guy that could be a solid number 2 tight end in the years to come. But again, the big thing with him is he's a blocker, and the Steelers need better blocking tight ends, so that's something he would help right away. Third, I have Brycen Hopkins. He's a little too rich for me. I think a lot of people think he's going to be gone by the time the Steelers either pick at 49 or certainly by their second pick at 102. I don't like him as much as I do Troutman as a fit at 49, and therefore I just don't like what he has to offer. He's a poor man's Noah Fant to me, so I'd stay away from him. And then last, I'd have Jacob Breeland. I think he's going to be an undrafted free agent, and I understand that you're not sacrificing anything to sign him then, but he just offers little upside to me, and coming off a season-ending knee injury, I'd just stay away. But that's just me.
Me, starting with my list, I have Dalton Keene at the top from Virginia Tech. He was the best blocker by far, and at this point, that's all the Steelers need, in my opinion. I see a lot of upside in his pass catching as well, and the price point he's at definitely has value. I think that he won't go into like the fourth round, so that was a pretty solid value. Mitchell Wilcox comes next, mostly because I think he will go undrafted. He could be an interesting option in camp because of his pass catching skills. He could end up on the practice squad as teams try to develop him and see if they could get him to block more effectively, because he had that willingness to block, just wasn't very good at it. So he could be a practice squad guy that maybe develops later. Third is Albert O. The speed is definitely interesting, but I think teams are going to overvalue him because of it. He really has a lot to work on, but still would be a fun project for a team. Then I have Cole Kmet. I liked him, but the difference in play between him and Dalton Keene wasn't very big. And with Kmet likely going off the board in round 2, I had to have him fourth because I felt like Dalton Keene had more upside than Kmet, if I'm being honest. Then that leaves Colby Parkinson for last. The blocking was just atrocious, and right now if the Steelers grab a tight end, it would have to be someone who could block. And people said that he can go as early as round 3. The value 100% isn't there. I would stay away from Colby Parkinson personally. But yeah, that's just me.
All right, so there's not a whole lot going on as far as news goes, but the Chiefs signed DeAndre Washington, the running back, to a 1-year deal. That's pretty much it right now as far as the nation goes, the NFL nation.
Steelers avoided a hard knocks.
Yeah, that's right.
LA teams.
How's that going to work?
I know, it's odd. So it's going to be the Rams and the Chargers as long as there is a training camp bearing coronavirus, So the Steelers avoided it because of a special episode. I don't know how they got that lucky, but I'll take it.
And as far as the Steelers go, just a few things. I guess the NFL Network was rebroadcasting Super Bowl 45 between the Packers and Steelers, and it brought up some bad memories for Rashard Mendenhall, who I guess fans were jabbing at on Twitter. And is that the most crushing moment in Steelers Super Bowl history? Neil O'Donnell's 2 picks are probably right there with him, if not more so. That fumble in Super Bowl 45 was a crusher, though.
I missed what you said. I missed the beginning.
Were
you talking about the Rashard Mendenhall fumble that they replayed on NFL Network?
Yep, that's exactly what I was talking about.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Yeah, Mendenhall was getting a lot of flack for that again, like it was 2010 all over again.
I guess it's just a decade-based thing with him. That was a really crushing moment in that game, though.
Oh yeah, it was terrible.
So ESPN also recently did an article picking one player from every NFL team that this whole shutdown is worst affecting. And for the Steelers, they picked quarterback Mason Rudolph because with Ben Roethlisberger on the mend from his elbow injury, Rudolph was supposed to be the guy that would get most of the early snaps in OTAs and mini camps. And on top of that, this would have been his first opportunity to really work with the quarterbacks coach because Matt Canada was brought in, as we all remember. So do you agree with that evaluation of him being the most hurt by this shutdown?
I think that he would get a lot of snaps in like the training camps and stuff to reevaluate him, and he gets to work with a new quarterback coach. I think he is getting hurt by this. I'm not sure he's the most hurt, but I can't think of someone else at the moment on the spot.
I can't either. Maybe just new players like Eric Ebron, just because you don't get a chance to go in and work with the team. But outside of that, I think Rudolph is the most affected of the guys currently on the team. Currently on the roster.
So, I agree.
Alrighty then. Anything else we wanted to point out before we wrap this one up?
Oh, we should be good.
Alrighty. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you as always for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. And Austin, thank you for joining me as always. If you have any questions about the show, please feel free to email us at strongerthansteelpodcast@gmail.com. And check out our website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com. We post our episodes on YouTube and SoundCloud under the name Stronger Than Steel Podcast. Thanks again, everybody. And Austin, you have a terrific day. And everyone, have a terrific day and stay safe out there. Take care.
Bye.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.